The funeral flowers were still fresh when Marcus found the eviction notice taped to the front door. 24 hours after laying his mother to rest, 24 hours after watching dirt fall onto the casket that held the only person who had ever truly loved him, and here was a crisp white envelope with his name typed in cold, official letters. His hands shook as he read the words that would haunt him for months to come. 30 days to vacate the premises. Property sold. No exceptions. Before you jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He stared at the paper until the words blurred together, his mind struggling to process what this meant. This was his childhood home, the place where his mother had raised him after his biological father disappeared when he was 3. This was where she had painted his bedroom walls blue because he loved the ocean, where she had helped him with homework at the kitchen table every night, where she had held him through nightmares and celebrated every small victory. Now, according to this notice, it belonged to someone else entirely. The key turned in the lock behind him, and Marcus spun around to face his stepfather, David Callahan, emerging from the house with a satisfied smirk stretching across his weathered face. David had married his mother, Elena, 5 years ago, bringing what seemed like stability to their small family. Elena had been so happy finally having a partner to share her burdens after years of raising Marcus alone. She had trusted David completely, even going so far as to add his name to various documents and accounts to make their life together easier. "You got the notice, I see," David said, not even attempting to hide his pleasure. "Movers come Thursday to clear out whatever I don't want to keep." Marcus felt his world tilt sideways. "What are you talking about? This is our house. This is Mom's house." David's laugh was harsh and calculating. "Was your mother's house. Now it's mine, and I've got better plans for this prime real estate than watching you mope around like a lost puppy." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. During her final months battling cancer, Elena had signed papers that David claimed would protect their family's future. She had been weak, trusting, desperate to ensure Marcus would be taken care of after she was gone. Instead, she had unknowingly signed away everything to the man who was now revealing his true nature with cruel clarity. "She trusted you," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own heartbeat. "She loved you." "She was useful," David replied with a shrug. "Sweet woman, but naive. Did you really think I married her for love? Look at this neighborhood, this house. Your mother had assets, and now they're mine, including the life insurance policy she thought was going to take care of her precious boy." The words echoed in Marcus's head as he walked away from the only home he had ever known, carrying nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and the ache of betrayal that seemed to have settled permanently in his chest. At 22, Marcus Chen found himself completely alone in the world, with nowhere to go and no resources to fall back on. His part-time job at the campus bookstore barely covered his college expenses when he had been living at home rent-free. Now, facing the reality of rent, utilities, and basic survival, he realized how carefully his mother had shielded him from financial hardship throughout his life. The next few weeks passed in a blur of desperate phone calls and rejected apartment applications. Marcus had no credit history, no savings, and no cosigner willing to vouch for him. He spent his first night sleeping in his beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, watching the sun rise through the windshield while trying to figure out how his life had collapsed so completely in such a short time. His mother's friends, the ones who had brought casseroles and offered condolences at the funeral, suddenly became unreachable when he called asking for temporary help. It seemed that David had gotten to them first, spinning stories about Marcus being irresponsible and ungrateful. The few who did take his calls expressed sympathy, but claimed they didn't have space or resources to help. Marcus began to understand that David's manipulation had been more thorough than he had initially realized. By the third week, Marcus had managed to find a tiny studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant in the worst part of town. The rent was month to month, and the landlord, Mrs. Wu, had taken pity on him after he explained his situation in broken Mandarin that he had learned from his mother. The apartment was barely larger than a closet, with a hot plate for a kitchen and a bathroom shared with the tenant next door, but it was shelter. Marcus paid the first month's rent with money he made from selling his textbooks and the few valuable items he had managed to salvage from his mother's house before David changed the locks. The studio became his refuge and his prison. During the day, he attended his classes at the local community college, where he was studying business administration with hopes of eventually transferring to a 4-year university. His grades, which had always been solid when he had the stability of home and his mother's encouragement, began to slip as stress and exhaustion took their toll. He found himself sleeping during lectures, his mind constantly preoccupied with the basic mathematics of survival. Rent plus food plus gas plus tuition equaled more money than he could possibly earn at his current job. Marcus picked up additional work wherever he could find it. He washed dishes at the restaurant below his apartment in exchange for occasional meals, delivered newspapers in the early morning hours before class, and spent weekends doing odd jobs for anyone willing to pay cash. His hands became permanently stained with newsprint and dish soap, his shoulders ached from carrying heavy bags, and his social life disappeared entirely as every free moment was consumed by the need to earn money. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
His classmates talked about spring break plans and summer internships, while Marcus calculated whether he could afford both lunch and dinner on any given day. He watched his former friends post pictures of parties and weekend trips on social media, while he worked his third job of the week, feeling like he was living in a completely different world from the one he had inhabited just months before. David, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. Through mutual acquaintances, Marcus heard updates about his stepfather's new life. The house had been renovated and sold for a substantial profit. David had purchased a luxury condo downtown and was driving a new BMW. He had taken several expensive vacations and was apparently dating a woman 20 years younger than Elena had been. The life insurance money that was supposed to secure Marcus's future was funding David's midlife crisis instead. The injustice of it all ate away at Marcus like acid. He would lie awake at night in his cramped studio, listening to the sounds of the city through thin walls, and think about his mother's final months. Elena had been so worried about leaving him alone, so concerned about his future security. She had made David promise repeatedly that he would look out for Marcus, treat him like his own son. David had made those promises easily, holding Elena's frail hand and speaking words of comfort that Marcus now knew had been complete lies. 3 months after the eviction, Marcus was walking across campus when he spotted a familiar figure near the administration building. David was there, dressed in an expensive suit, talking animatedly with someone Marcus didn't recognize. For a moment, Marcus considered approaching him, demanding an explanation, or at least an acknowledgement of what he had done. But as he got closer, he overheard part of the conversation that made his blood run cold. The cancer was a blessing in disguise, David was saying to his companion, made everything so much simpler. She signed whatever I put in front of her without reading the fine print. Marcus ducked behind a nearby tree, his heart pounding as he listened to David continue. The kid's been taken care of, don't worry about that. He's got a roof over his head and a job. Character building, really. His mother coddled him too much anyway. The casual cruelty in David's voice, the dismissive way he spoke about Elena's death and Marcus's suffering, ignited something fierce and determined in Marcus's chest. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about justice for his mother's memory and accountability for the lies and manipulation that had destroyed everything she had worked to build. That night, Marcus sat in his tiny apartment with a notebook and pen, writing down everything he could remember about the months leading up to his mother's death. Every document David had asked her to sign, every conversation about their future plans, every promise he had made about taking care of Marcus. He documented the timeline of David's behavior, from the concerned stepfather act during Elena's illness to the cold revelation of his true intentions after her death. Marcus also began researching David's background more thoroughly than he had ever thought to do when the man was courting his mother. What he found was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. David had been married twice before, both times to women who had died under circumstances that left him substantially wealthier. The first wife had died in a car accident 2 years after their wedding, leaving David as the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. The second had succumbed to a sudden illness, again with David inheriting her assets. The pattern was clear, even if Marcus couldn't prove anything criminal. David Callahan was a predator who targeted vulnerable women with assets, gained their trust, secured legal access to their wealth, and then benefited from their deaths. Elena had been his third victim, and Marcus was collateral damage in a scheme that was both calculated and heartless. As spring turned to summer, Marcus threw himself into his investigation with the same intensity he had once applied to his studies. He spent hours in the public library, researching legal precedents and estate law. He learned about concepts like undue influence, fraud, and coercion. He discovered that there were legal remedies for situations where someone had been manipulated into signing documents they didn't fully understand, especially when they were in a vulnerable state due to illness. The more Marcus learned, the more he realized that he needed professional help to have any chance of challenging David's actions. But lawyers cost money he didn't have, and most of the attorneys he contacted weren't interested in taking a case on contingency when the evidence was primarily circumstantial. His mother was dead, David had legal documentation supporting his ownership of her assets, and Marcus was just a grieving stepson with no standing to contest the arrangements his mother had made. By late summer, Marcus had reached a point of near desperation. His grades had suffered so much that he was in danger of losing his financial aid for the fall semester. His multiple jobs barely covered his basic expenses, leaving no room for the kind of legal help he needed to pursue justice. He was physically and emotionally exhausted, running on determination alone as he tried to balance survival with his quest for accountability. It was during this lowest point that Marcus received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. He was working his shift at the bookstore, mind-numbingly shelving returned textbooks, when his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown local number. Normally, he would have let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. Marcus Chen? The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. Yes, this is Marcus. My name is Patricia Hendricks. I'm an attorney with Hendricks & Associates. I represent the estate of Elena Chen Callahan.
I believe we need to talk. Marcus nearly dropped the phone.
I'm sorry, what?
David said all the estate matters were settled months ago. Mr. Chan, could you meet me at my office tomorrow afternoon? There are some documents I need to show you. Documents I don't think Mr. Callahan is aware exist. The attorney's office was located in one of the newer buildings downtown, with glass walls and modern furniture that spoke of success and competence. Patricia Hendricks was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She greeted Marcus with a firm handshake and led him to a conference room where a manila folder sat waiting on the polished table. Mr. Chen, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve the truth, she began, settling into her chair across from him. Your mother came to see me 6 months before she died. She was concerned about some documents that Mr. Callahan had been asking her to sign, and she wanted to ensure that your interests were protected regardless of what happened to her. Marcus felt his heart skip. She never mentioned meeting with a lawyer. She asked me to keep our arrangement confidential. Your mother was a very intuitive woman, Mr. Chen. She suspected that Mr. Callahan's motives might not be entirely pure, but she didn't want to create conflict in the household while she was fighting for her life. Instead, she decided to take some precautionary measures. Patricia opened the folder and withdrew a document that Marcus had never seen before. This is a trust agreement that your mother established without Mr. Callahan's knowledge. She funded it with assets that he was unaware she possessed, including a life insurance policy through her former employer that she never mentioned to him. As Marcus read the document, he felt as though the ground was shifting beneath him. According to the trust agreement, Elena had set aside a substantial sum of money specifically for Marcus's education and future security. The trust was designed to remain dormant until after her death, at which point it would be activated and Marcus would be notified through her attorney. There's more, Patricia continued, pulling out additional papers. Your mother also wrote a detailed letter explaining her concerns about Mr. Callahan and her reasons for creating this trust. She wanted to ensure that you would have resources to challenge any questionable actions he might take after her death. The letter, written in his mother's familiar handwriting, was both heartbreaking and empowering. Elena had expressed her love for Marcus and her fears about David's true intentions. She had documented instances of manipulative behavior that she had witnessed, including David's attempts to isolate her from friends and his excessive interest in her financial affairs. Most importantly, she had provided Marcus with information about David's previous marriages and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his former wives' deaths. Your mother was more aware of Mr. Callahan's history than she let on. She hired a private investigator to look into his background after she became suspicious of his behavior. The investigator's report is included in your inheritance, along with documented evidence of financial irregularities in Mr. Callahan's previous marriages. Marcus sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the revelation that his mother had been working to protect him even while battling for her own life. The trust contained enough money to cover his remaining college expenses, provide him with a modest living allowance, and fund legal action against David if necessary. But more than the financial resources, Elena had given him the tools he needed to seek justice and hold David accountable for his actions. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Patricia smiled grimly. "Now, Mr. Chen, we have a conversation with Mr. Callahan about returning what rightfully belongs to you. Your mother's trust includes provisions that allow us to challenge any transfers of property that were made under duress or through fraudulent means. With the evidence she gathered and the timeline we can establish, we have a very strong case." Over the next several weeks, Patricia worked meticulously to build a comprehensive legal strategy. The private investigator's report revealed that David had used nearly identical tactics with his previous wives, gradually gaining control of their assets through a combination of emotional manipulation and legal maneuvering. Elena's documentation of his behavior provided crucial evidence that the documents she had signed were the result of undue influence during a time when she was physically and emotionally vulnerable.
The most damaging evidence was a series of emails between David and an unknown associate, discussing the timeline for Elena's expected death and the financial benefits that would result. The emails had been inadvertently copied to an old email account that Elena had shared with Marcus for family communications. Patricia's team was able to retrieve them from the account, providing clear evidence of David's calculating approach to his marriage. Armed with this evidence, Patricia filed a comprehensive lawsuit challenging David's inheritance of Elena's estate. The suit alleged fraud, undue influence, and elder abuse, seeking to void the transfers of property and assets that had occurred during Elena's final months. Additionally, the lawsuit demanded the return of the life insurance proceeds that David had claimed, arguing that the policy had been obtained through misrepresentation. David's response to the lawsuit was swift and predictably aggressive. He hired an expensive legal team and immediately began a campaign to discredit both Marcus and Elena's posthumous allegations. David claimed that Elena had been mentally competent when she signed the documents, that Marcus was simply a greedy stepson trying to steal his rightful inheritance, and that the trust Elena had established was evidence of her mental instability during her final months. The legal battle that followed was intense and emotionally draining. David's attorneys attempted to portray Marcus as an ungrateful child who had been estranged from his mother, despite evidence to the contrary. They questioned Elena's mental state during her illness and argued that her suspicions about David were the product of medication-induced paranoia. They even went so far as to suggest that Marcus had somehow influenced his dying mother to create the trust as a way to cheat David out of his legitimate inheritance. But Patricia and her team were prepared for these tactics. They had medical records showing that Elena had been mentally sharp throughout her illness, testimony from healthcare providers who had observed her interactions with David, and documented evidence of David's pattern of behavior with previous wives. Most importantly, they had Elena's own words, recorded in detailed journals that she had kept during her final months, describing her growing awareness of David's true nature and her determination to protect Marcus from his manipulation. The case took nearly 8 months to resolve, during which time Marcus continued to live in his tiny studio apartment and work his multiple jobs. The stress of the legal proceedings took a toll on his health and his studies, but the knowledge that his mother had been fighting for him even in her final days gave him strength to persist.
Patricia kept him informed of every development, and gradually it became clear that David's position was becoming increasingly untenable. The turning point came when Patricia's investigators uncovered financial records showing that David had been systematically draining Elena's accounts during her final months, transferring money to accounts that she didn't know existed. The transfers had been made using power of attorney documents that Elena had signed thinking they were for medical decisions, not financial ones. This evidence of financial abuse during Elena's vulnerable state proved to be the final blow to David's defense. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud, David's attorneys advised him to negotiate a settlement. The negotiations were tense and acrimonious, with David fighting to retain as much of Elena's assets as possible, while Patricia pushed for complete restitution plus damages for the suffering Marcus had endured. The final settlement exceeded Marcus's wildest hopes. David was required to return the house, which would be sold with the proceeds going to Marcus. The life insurance money that David had claimed was placed in an escrow account pending the resolution of criminal charges that the district attorney was now considering. Additionally, David was ordered to pay substantial damages for the emotional distress and financial hardship he had caused Marcus, along with covering all legal fees associated with the case. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the settlement was a clause that Patricia had insisted upon. David was required to write a formal letter of apology to Marcus, acknowledging his manipulation of Elena and the harm he had caused to her son. The letter would become part of the public record, ensuring that David's actions would be documented for any future potential victims to discover. The day Marcus received the keys to his childhood home was surreal and emotional. Walking through the rooms where he had grown up, seeing the spaces where his mother had lived and loved and worried about his future, he felt her presence in a way that was both comforting and heartbreaking. David's renovations had changed some details, but the essential character of the house remained the same. Standing in his mother's former bedroom, Marcus pulled out the letter she had written to him, the one that Patricia had delivered along with the trust documents. He read it again, focusing on the final paragraph where Elena had expressed her hopes for his future and her confidence in his ability to overcome whatever challenges he might face. "My dearest Marcus," the letter concluded, "I know that I cannot protect you from every hardship, but I hope that I have given you the tools you need to protect yourself. Remember that you are worthy of love and respect, and never let anyone convince you otherwise. Build a life that honors the values we shared, and know that I will always be proud of the man you are becoming. Love always, Mom." With the financial resources from the trust and the settlement, Marcus was able to quit his multiple jobs and focus on his education. He transferred to a 4-year university, majoring in business with a focus on ethics and corporate responsibility. The experience with David had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of protecting vulnerable people from predators who would exploit their trust for financial gain. Patricia Hendricks became both a mentor and a friend, offering Marcus guidance as he navigated his new circumstances and planned for his future. She suggested that he consider law school, pointing out that his experience and passion for justice could make him an effective advocate for others who had been victimized by similar schemes. The house sold for more than expected, providing Marcus with enough money to complete his education debt-free and establish a solid financial foundation for his adult life. He used part of the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund in his mother's name, designed to help students who had lost parents and were struggling to afford their education. David Callahan, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his actions both legally and socially. The criminal charges filed by the district attorney resulted in a conviction for elder abuse and fraud, earning him a sentence of 3 years in prison and substantial fines. His professional reputation was destroyed, his social connections severed, and his financial resources depleted by legal fees and restitution payments. The story of Elena's posthumous protection of her son and David's exposure as a predator spread through their community, serving as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration for other families to come forward with suspicions about unusual circumstances surrounding the deaths of elderly relatives, leading to investigations that revealed a broader pattern of elder abuse in the area. 2 years after his mother's death, Marcus graduated summa cum laude with his bachelor's degree and was accepted to law school with a full scholarship.
At the graduation ceremony, he carried a small photograph of Elena in his pocket, feeling her pride and love as he walked across the stage to receive his diploma. The experience had fundamentally changed Marcus's understanding of justice, resilience, and the power of love to transcend even death. His mother's final act of protection had not only secured his future, but had also revealed the strength and wisdom she had possessed even in her most vulnerable moments. The trust she had established was more than a financial instrument. It was a testament to her enduring love and her determination to ensure that truth would ultimately prevail over deception. The courtroom smelled of old wood and nervous sweat, as Marcus sat beside Patricia watching David enter flanked by his team of expensive legal attorneys. 3 months had passed since the lawsuit was filed, and today marked the beginning of what would either vindicate his mother's memory or crush his hopes for justice entirely. David looked confident, almost smug, as he settled into his chair at the defendant's table, occasionally glancing over at Marcus with what appeared to be amused contempt.
Judge Rebecca Martinez called the court to order with a sharp rap of her gavel, her stern expression suggesting she had little patience for games or theatrics. Patricia had warned Marcus that Judge Martinez was known for running a tight courtroom and making decisions based strictly on evidence rather than emotion. This would be a battle won or lost on the strength of documentation and legal precedent, not on sympathy for a grieving stepson. David's lead attorney, James Rothschild, was a man with silver hair and a reputation for defending wealthy clients in complex estate disputes. His opening statement painted David as a devoted husband who had cared for Elena during her final months, only to face baseless accusations from a resentful stepson who couldn't accept his mother's choices. Rothschild argued that Elena had been of sound mind when she made her decisions, that the documents she signed were clear and legally binding, and that Marcus's claims were nothing more than an attempt to overturn his mother's wishes after the fact. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Rothschild said in his practiced courtroom voice, "this case is about a young man who cannot accept that his mother chose to provide for her husband rather than continuing to enable his dependency. Mr. Callahan married Elena Chen in good faith, supported her through her illness, and honored her wishes as expressed in legally executed documents. The plaintiff would have you believe that love and marriage are somehow fraudulent when they result in inheritance." Patricia's opening statement told a different story entirely. She methodically outlined the pattern of David's behavior, the suspicious circumstances surrounding his previous marriages, and the evidence that Elena had been manipulated during her most vulnerable moments. Patricia spoke directly to the jury about the difference between legitimate inheritance and predatory exploitation, emphasizing that the law existed specifically to protect people like Elena from those who would abuse their trust. "The evidence will show," Patricia declared, "that Mr. Callahan entered into marriage with Elena Chen not out of love, but as part of a calculated scheme to gain access to her assets. The evidence will show that he isolated her from friends and family, manipulated her during her illness, and obtained her signature on documents she did not fully understand. Most importantly, the evidence will show that Elena herself recognized this manipulation and took steps to protect her son from its consequences." The first witness Patricia called was Dr. Sarah Yamamoto, Elena's oncologist who had treated her throughout her final months. Dr. Yamamoto testified that Elena had been mentally sharp and articulate during her medical appointments, expressing concerns about financial pressure she was receiving at home. The doctor recalled Elena asking questions about how long she might have to live and whether there were resources available to help families protect themselves from financial exploitation during terminal illness. "Mrs. Callahan was very worried about her son's future," Dr. Yamamoto testified. "She asked me specifically about organizations that help families navigate end-of-life financial planning. She seemed concerned that someone was trying to rush her into making decisions before she was ready." Rothschild's cross-examination attempted to characterize Elena's concerns as the normal anxiety of a dying woman rather than evidence of manipulation. He suggested that Dr. Yamamoto was reading too much into casual comments, and that it was natural for Elena to worry about financial matters while facing her own mortality.
But Dr. Yamamoto held firm to her testimony, noting that Elena's concerns had been specific and persistent rather than general anxiety. The second day of testimony brought Elena's former neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had lived next door to Elena and Marcus for over 15 years. Mrs. Rodriguez described watching David's behavior change dramatically after the marriage, particularly during Elena's illness. She testified about observing David screening Elena's phone calls, limiting her visitors, and speaking to her in ways that seemed controlling rather than supportive. Before she got sick, Elena would come over for coffee every Tuesday morning. We had been doing this for years, but after David moved in, he started saying she was too tired for visits. Then during her treatment, he would answer the door and tell me she was sleeping, even when I could see her looking out the window wanting to talk. Mrs. Rodriguez also testified about a conversation she had with Elena just weeks before her death, when Elena had managed to speak with her privately while David was out. Elena had expressed fears about what would happen to Marcus after she was gone, and had asked Mrs. Rodriguez to keep an eye on him. She had also mentioned being confused about papers that David wanted her to sign, saying they seemed different from what he had described to her. The prosecution's case was building momentum, but Marcus knew the real bombshell was yet to come. On the third day, Patricia called Detective Michael Foster, the investigator Elena had secretly hired to research David's background. Detective Foster had been retired from the police force for 5 years and had started a private investigation business specializing in background checks and financial fraud cases. Detective Foster's testimony was methodical and devastating. He had discovered that David's first wife, Catherine Mullins, had died in a single-car accident just 18 months after their wedding. The accident had occurred on a remote country road, late at night, under circumstances that the local police had found suspicious but were unable to prove as anything other than tragic misfortune. Catherine had been returning from a meeting with a divorce attorney, a fact that David had never mentioned to anyone. The insurance payout from Mrs. Mullins' death was substantial. Mr. Callahan collected on both her life insurance and an accidental death policy that had been purchased just 6 months before the accident. The timing and circumstances raised questions that were never fully resolved. David's second wife, Margaret Brennan, had died of what appeared to be complications from food poisoning, but Detective Foster had uncovered medical records suggesting that her symptoms were consistent with poisoning from household chemicals rather than bacterial contamination. Margaret had also been in the process of consulting with an attorney about her marriage, having discovered that David had been secretly borrowing against her assets without her knowledge. Both women had expressed concerns to friends and family about Mr. Callahan's behavior in the months before their deaths, Detective Foster continued. Both had discovered financial irregularities. Both were considering divorce. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. Rothschild's cross-examination of Detective Foster was aggressive and pointed. He characterized the investigator as a conspiracy theorist who was reading sinister motives into tragic coincidences. He pointed out that no criminal charges had ever been filed in connection with either death, and argued that Detective Foster's speculation was not admissible evidence of wrongdoing in the current case. But the damage had been done. The jury had heard about David's pattern of behavior, and Patricia had established that Elena had been aware of this history when she made the decision to protect Marcus through the secret trust. The foundation was laid for the most crucial part of the case: Elena's own words from beyond the grave. On the fourth day of testimony, Patricia introduced Elena's journals into evidence. These were detailed daily records that Elena had kept during her final 6 months, documenting her interactions with David, her concerns about his motives, and her growing determination to protect Marcus from what she suspected was coming. The journals had been discovered in a safety deposit box that Elena had rented without David's knowledge, along with copies of all the documents he had asked her to sign. Patricia read selected entries to the jury, painting a picture of a woman who was fighting not just cancer, but also the growing realization that her husband was not who she had believed him to be. The entries chronicled David's increasingly controlling behavior, his attempts to isolate her from friends, and his persistent pressure for her to sign financial documents that she didn't fully understand. One entry from 3 months before Elena's death was particularly powerful. David brought more papers today. He says they're to protect Marcus, but when I asked to have my friend Mary look at them, he got angry and said I don't trust him. Why would he be upset about me wanting a second opinion? I'm starting to think Mom was right about being careful when someone is too eager to handle your money. Another entry, written just weeks before her death, revealed Elena's decision to take action. I can't ignore this anymore. The detective's report confirms what I was afraid of. David has done this before. I have to protect Marcus, even if it means going behind David's back. I opened the safety deposit box today and met with the lawyer. If I'm wrong about David, then Marcus will simply have a nice inheritance. If I'm right, then at least I've given him the tools to fight back. The journals also documented Elena's physical and emotional state during the period when she signed the documents that transferred her assets to David. The entries described episodes of severe pain, confusion for medication, and emotional distress that made it difficult for her to concentrate on complex legal language. They painted a picture of a vulnerable woman being pressured to make major financial decisions while battling for her life. Rothschild attempted to discredit the journals by arguing that they represented Elena's medicated imagination rather than factual observations. He suggested that the medication Elena was taking could have caused paranoia and delusions, making her suspicious of David's legitimate attempts to help her organize her affairs. He also argued that the journals were self-serving documents that Elena had created specifically to support a future legal challenge. But Patricia had anticipated this line of attack. She called Elena's pharmacist, who testified about the specific medications Elena had been taking and their side effects. The pharmacist confirmed that while Elena's medications could cause some confusion, they were not known to cause paranoid delusions or false memories. She also called Elena's primary care physician, who testified that Elena had been lucid and rational during their appointments, even while dealing with significant pain. The fifth day brought the testimony that Marcus had been both dreading and anticipating, his own time on the witness stand. Patricia had prepared him extensively for this moment, warning him that Rothschild would try to portray him as a spoiled young man who felt entitled to his mother's money. The key was to remain calm, stick to the facts, and let his genuine grief and love for his mother come through without appearing to seek sympathy. Marcus testified about his relationship with his mother, describing the close bond they had shared and her dedication to his education and future. He spoke about David's behavior during the courtship and marriage, noting that how David had initially seemed caring and supportive, but had gradually become more controlling and dismissive of Marcus's presence in the household. At first, David seemed to really care about making Mom happy, Marcus told the jury. He would bring her flowers, take her to nice restaurants, talk about the future they would build together. But after they got married, especially after Mom got sick, he seemed more interested in the practical details of her life than in making her comfortable. Marcus described the confusion and devastation he had felt when he discovered the eviction notice and the subsequent revelation that David had inherited everything. He testified about the months of struggle that followed, the jobs he had taken to survive, and the impact that David's actions had on his education and emotional well-being. "I wasn't asking for everything," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "I just wanted to honor what my mother had worked for. She had always told me that education was the most important thing, that knowledge was something no one could take away from you. When David took the house and the insurance money, he wasn't just taking away my inheritance, he was taking away the future that my mother had sacrificed to build for me."
Rothschild asked. "I wanted my mother to be happy," Marcus replied carefully. "If David had made her happy and treated her well, I would have supported their marriage completely." "But you didn't think he was good enough for her, did you?" "I thought he was hiding something," Marcus said. "My mother taught me to trust my instincts about people, and my instincts told me that David's interest in our family wasn't entirely genuine." Rothschild pressed harder, trying to get Marcus to admit that he had influenced his mother's decision to create the trust. But Marcus held firm to his testimony that he had known nothing about the trust until after his mother's death, and that all the protective measures Elena had taken had been her own initiative. The sixth day brought character witnesses for both sides. David's team presented friends and colleagues who testified about his devotion to Elena during her illness and his grief after her death.
They painted a picture of a man who had genuinely loved his wife and was now being unfairly attacked by a stepson who couldn't accept his mother's choices. But Patricia's character witnesses told a different story. She called Elena's longtime friends, who testified about changes they had observed in Elena's behavior after her marriage to David. They described how Elena had become more isolated, how David had gradually taken over more aspects of her daily life, and how she had seemed increasingly anxious about financial matters during her final months. One particularly powerful witness was Elena's former colleague, Janet Martinez, who had worked with Elena for over 10 years at the insurance company where Elena had been employed. Janet testified about Elena's strong personality and independent nature, making David's claims about Elena's dependent relationship on him seem inconsistent with who Elena had been throughout her life. Elena was one of the most competent, organized people I ever worked with, Janet told the jury. She handled complex insurance cases involving millions of dollars. The idea that she would sign important documents without understanding them just doesn't fit with the woman I knew for a decade. The seventh day featured financial experts who analyzed the transactions that had occurred during Elena's final months. Patricia's expert witness, certified public accountant Robert Kim, walked the jury through a timeline of asset transfers that painted a disturbing picture of systematic financial manipulation. Kim testified that the pattern of transfers was consistent with financial elder abuse rather than legitimate estate planning. The timing of the transfers corresponded with Elena's worst periods of illness, when she would have been least able to fully comprehend the implications of what she was signing. The amounts transferred were also suspicious, representing nearly Elena's entire net worth rather than the partial arrangements that would be typical in legitimate spousal estate planning. What we see here, Kim explained to the jury, is a pattern of someone taking advantage of windows of opportunity when Mrs. Callahan was most vulnerable. The transfers were front-loaded during her sickest periods, then tapered off as she regained some strength toward the end. This suggests calculation rather than the natural evolution of a couple's financial planning. The eighth day featured the most dramatic testimony of the trial, David himself taking the stand in his own defense. Rothschild had calculated that David's personal testimony was necessary to counter the negative picture that had been painted of him throughout the trial. David needed to appear sympathetic and genuine if he was going to convince the jury that his actions had been motivated by love rather than greed. David's direct testimony was polished and emotional. He spoke about falling in love with Elena, about the joy they had shared during their brief marriage, and about the devastation he had felt watching her battle cancer. He denied manipulating her in any way, claiming that all the financial arrangements had been Elena's idea because she wanted to ensure his security after her death. Elena was worried about leaving me alone, David testified, dabbing at his eyes with a tissue. She knew that I had given up my apartment to move in with her, that I had restructured my life around taking care of her. She insisted on making these arrangements because she said I had sacrificed too much to be left with nothing. David also addressed the allegations about his previous marriages, claiming that the deaths of his former wives had been tragic coincidences that had nothing to do with his current situation. He portrayed himself as someone who had been unlucky in love, losing 2 wives to premature death, only to find happiness again with Elena and then lose her as well. But Patricia's cross-examination revealed the weaknesses in David's story. She confronted him with specific entries in Elena's journals that contradicted his version of events, particularly those describing pressure and confusion around the document signing. She also pressed him about the timeline of his relationship with Elena, revealing that he had begun dating her within weeks of learning about her substantial assets through mutual friends. Isn't it true, Mr. Callahan, that you learned about Mrs. Chen's financial situation before you asked her out on your first date? I don't recall the specific timeline, David replied, but his discomfort was visible to the jury. Patricia produced phone records showing that David had called Elena's insurance company to inquire about her employment and benefits before their second date, a fact that David struggled to explain. She also confronted him with emails between David and an associate discussing Elena's investment potential and the timeline for maximum return. The most damaging moment came when Patricia asked David about the eviction notice that Marcus had found the day after Elena's funeral. David had claimed that the house sale was motivated by his inability to afford the mortgage payments, but Patricia revealed that David had actually contacted real estate agents about selling the house while Elena was still alive. "You were planning to sell Mrs. Chen's house before she even died, weren't you?" Patricia asked. "I was exploring options," David admitted reluctantly. "Options that you never discussed with Mrs. Chen, according to her journals."
She was too sick to be bothered with those details. Patricia's final question was devastating. "Mr. Callahan, if you truly loved Elena and respected her wishes, why didn't you honor her clear desire to protect her son's future?" David's answer was rambling and defensive, revealing the calculation behind his sympathetic facade. The jury could see that beneath the grieving widower act was someone who had viewed Elena as an opportunity rather than a partner. The closing arguments brought the two competing narratives into sharp focus. Rothschild weighed one final attempt to portray David as a victim of false accusations, emphasizing the legal validity of the documents Elena had signed and arguing that Marcus was simply trying to overturn his mother's legitimate choices through emotional manipulation of the jury. Patricia's closing argument was a masterpiece of logical progression and emotional appeal. She walked the jury through the evidence step by step, showing how each piece fit into a pattern of predatory behavior that had culminated in Elena's death and Marcus's devastation. She reminded the jury that Elena herself had recognized the danger and had taken extraordinary steps to protect her son from the consequences of her own victimization. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia concluded, "Elena Chen knew she was dying, but she refused to let David Callahan destroy her son's future along with her own life. She fought back in the only way she could, by documenting the truth and preserving resources that David didn't know existed. Today, you have the power to complete Elena's final act of love and protection. You have the power to ensure that justice prevails over manipulation, that love triumphs over greed." The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdict. As the foreman stood to read the decision, Marcus felt his heart pounding so hard he was certain everyone in the courtroom could hear it. The months of legal battle, the emotional testimony, the financial evidence, all of it came down to this single moment. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Chen," the foreman announced. "We find that the defendant, David Callahan, obtained the assets of Elena Chen Callahan through undue influence and fraudulent misrepresentation." The courtroom erupted in a mixture of celebration and dismay. Marcus felt Patricia's hand squeeze his shoulder as tears of relief and vindication streamed down his face. Across the courtroom, David sat in stunned silence while his attorneys frantically whispered among themselves about appeal options. But the jury wasn't finished. They also awarded Marcus substantial punitive damages, finding that David's actions had been particularly egregious given his pattern of similar behavior with previous wives. The total amount exceeded even Patricia's optimistic projections, representing not just the return of Elena's assets, but also compensation for the suffering that David's manipulation had caused. Judge Martinez scheduled a hearing for the following week to address the specific terms of asset recovery and to consider Patricia's motion for attorney's fees to be paid by David. As the courtroom cleared, Marcus remained seated for several minutes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. Elena's final gift to her son had been vindication and justice, delivered through the legal system she had trusted to protect him when she could no longer do so herself. The secret trust had provided the resources for the fight, but it was Elena's meticulous documentation of David's behavior that had ultimately secured Marcus's victory. Walking out of the courthouse that day, Marcus carried with him not just the satisfaction of legal victory, but the profound knowledge that his mother's love had transcended death itself to protect him when he needed it most. The battle was over, but the real work of rebuilding his life was just beginning. The marble steps of the courthouse felt different under Marcus's feet as he descended them for the final time, carrying a leather folder containing the signed settlement documents that would change his life forever. 3 weeks had passed since the jury's verdict, and today marked the completion of all legal proceedings related to his mother's estate. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, but Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. David's appeal attempts had failed spectacularly when his new legal team discovered additional evidence that Patricia's investigators had uncovered during the post-trial discovery period. Bank records from overseas accounts revealed that David had been systematically moving money out of the country throughout Elena's illness, preparing for what appeared to be a permanent relocation once her death provided him with the liquid assets he needed.
The revelation had prompted the district attorney to file additional criminal charges, and David's lawyers had advised him to accept the settlement terms rather than face the possibility of federal prosecution for money laundering. The settlement terms were more comprehensive than Marcus had ever dared to hope. Beyond the return of his mother's house and life insurance proceeds, David was required to surrender assets he had purchased with Elena's money, including the luxury condominium, the BMW, and several high-end pieces of art that he had acquired during his brief period of wealth. The punitive damages awarded by the jury would be paid through the forced sale of these assets, ensuring that David's lifestyle would return to the modest circumstances he had inhabited before targeting Elena. Marcus walked slowly through downtown Portland, observing the bustling city life around him with new eyes. For the first time in over a year, he wasn't rushing between jobs or calculating whether he could afford lunch. The immediate financial pressures that had consumed his every waking moment were gone, replaced by the surreal sensation of having choices about his future. The settlement money sat in a bank account that seemed almost fictional in its abundance, representing not just financial security, but the restoration of possibilities that David's actions had stolen from him. His first stop was the law office, where Patricia was waiting with the final paperwork and a bottle of champagne that she had been saving for this moment. Patricia had become more than his attorney during the lengthy legal battle. She had become a mentor and friend who understood the deeper significance of their victory. Her own career had been built on protecting vulnerable people from predators like David, and Marcus's case represented everything she believed the legal system could accomplish when it functioned properly. "How does it feel to be a wealthy young man?" Patricia asked with a smile, as Marcus settled into the familiar chair across from her desk. "Unreal," Marcus admitted, running his fingers along the edge of the settlement document. "Yesterday I was budgeting for ramen noodles, and today I'm trying to figure out what to do with more money than I've ever seen." Patricia laughed, but her expression quickly became serious. "Money can solve many problems, Marcus, but it can also create new ones if you're not careful. Your mother was wise to include provisions in her trust that protect these assets from being squandered. You have an opportunity to build something meaningful with what she left you." The trust that Elena had established contained sophisticated provisions that reflected her deep understanding of Marcus's character and her hopes for his future. Rather than providing him with unrestricted access to a large sum of money, the trust was structured to support his education, encourage entrepreneurship, and provide for long-term financial security while preventing the kind of reckless spending that could destroy her mother's legacy. Marcus could access funds for educational expenses without restriction, including graduate school, professional training, or any other learning opportunities that would enhance his career prospects. The trust also provided a generous living allowance that would support a comfortable lifestyle without encouraging extravagance.
Additional funds were available for purchasing a home, starting a business, or making other investments, but these required approval from the Trust's Board of Advisors, which included Patricia and 2 other professionals that Elena had carefully selected. "Your mother understood that sudden wealth can be as dangerous as poverty," Patricia explained, as she reviewed the trust provisions with Marcus. She wanted to ensure that her sacrifice would benefit not just you, but potentially your children and grandchildren. "The structure she created will preserve and grow these assets for generations if managed properly." The most touching aspect of Elena's planning was a series of sealed letters that she had left for Marcus to open at specific milestones in his life. Patricia handed him the first letter, marked "To be opened after legal resolution," and watched as Marcus carefully broke the wax seal that his mother had applied with her own hands during her final weeks. The letter was written in Elena's familiar handwriting, slightly shakier than usual due to her illness, but still unmistakably hers. As Marcus read, he could hear his mother's voice speaking the words of love, pride, and guidance that she had wanted him to receive at this crucial moment in his life. "My dearest Marcus," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then justice has prevailed and David's true nature has been exposed. I am so proud of the strength and determination you must have shown to reach this point. The road has been difficult, but you have proven yourself worthy of the future I dreamed of for you." Elena's letter went on to explain her decision-making process during her final months, revealing the careful planning and strategic thinking that had gone into protecting Marcus from David's manipulation.
She acknowledged the pain that her secrecy must have caused him, but explained that she had needed to maintain the facade of trust in David while secretly building the foundation for Marcus's eventual victory. I want you to know that every choice I made was motivated by love for you and determination to ensure that David's greed would not destroy the future we had worked so hard to build together. Use what I have left you not just to achieve your own dreams, but to help others who face similar challenges. Be the protector for someone else that you needed during your darkest hours. The letter concluded with specific advice about Marcus's education and career, revealing that Elena had researched law schools and business programs that would prepare him for a life of meaningful work. She had even included recommendations for mentors and professional connections that could guide his development, showing that her planning had extended far beyond simple financial provision. Reading his mother's words in Patricia's office, Marcus felt the final pieces of his grief settling into a form that he could carry forward productively. The anger and confusion that had dominated his emotions for over a year were transforming into clarity of purpose and determination to honor Elena's memory through his own actions and choices. Over the following weeks, Marcus began the process of reclaiming his childhood home and transforming it into a space that honored his mother's memory while serving his own needs as an adult. The house had been empty since David's eviction, and returning to it was both emotionally challenging and deeply healing. Every room held memories of his life with Elena, but now those memories were accompanied by the knowledge of how far she had gone to protect him. Marcus hired contractors to undo some of David's renovations, restoring elements of the house that held special significance for him and his mother. He converted Elena's former sewing room into a home office where he could study and manage his finances, surrounding himself with her books and photographs while planning his own future. The kitchen, where he and Elena had shared countless meals and conversations, became a space for entertaining the friends and mentors who were helping him navigate his new circumstances. The process of furnishing and personalizing the house gave Marcus time to think carefully about his next steps. The trust provided him with the luxury of choice, but Elena's letter had made clear her expectations that he would use his opportunities wisely. After extensive research and conversations with Patricia and other advisors, Marcus decided to pursue a dual-degree program that would combine law and business, preparing him for a career that could encompass both justice advocacy and entrepreneurship. His application to the University of Oregon's joint JD MBA program was strengthened by his unique personal story and his demonstrated resilience in the face of adversity. The admissions committee was impressed not just by his academic potential, but by his clear sense of purpose and his commitment to using his education to help others facing similar challenges. Marcus was accepted with a partial scholarship that recognized both his merit and his contributions to the university community. The summer before starting his graduate program, Marcus volunteered with several organizations that supported victims of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Working with social workers, attorneys, and counselors who dealt with these issues daily, he began to understand the broader scope of the problem that had affected his own family. David's predatory behavior was part of a much larger pattern of exploitation that targeted vulnerable adults throughout the country, often with devastating consequences for entire families. Marcus's volunteer work brought him into contact with other families who were fighting battles similar to the one he had won. He met adult children who had watched their parents' life savings disappear to manipulative caregivers, spouses who had discovered that their partners had been systematically draining joint accounts, and elderly individuals who had been pressured into signing away their assets to people they trusted. Each story reinforced his growing conviction that his legal victory was not just personal vindication, but a responsibility to help others achieve similar justice. One case that particularly moved Marcus involved an elderly woman named Dorothy Fitzpatrick, whose nephew had convinced her to sign over power of attorney and then had liquidated her assets to fund his gambling addiction. Dorothy's situation was complicated by the fact that she suffered from early-stage dementia, making it difficult to prove that she had been competent when she signed the documents. Her remaining family members lacked the resources to hire the kind of legal representation that could challenge the nephew's actions effectively. Marcus quietly funded Dorothy's legal case through an anonymous donation, working with Patricia to connect the family with experienced attorneys who specialized in elder abuse cases. The case took months to resolve, but eventually Dorothy's assets were recovered and her nephew faced criminal charges for financial exploitation. Marcus attended the court hearing where Dorothy was reunited with her savings, watching from the back of the courtroom as an elderly woman regained her dignity and security. The experience reinforced Marcus's understanding that his mother's final gift had been more than financial resources. It had been an education in the power of preparation, documentation, and strategic thinking to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Elena had shown Marcus that victims of exploitation were not powerless, but that fighting back required careful planning, professional support, and the kind of evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. As Marcus prepared to begin his graduate studies, he received an unexpected phone call that would reshape his understanding of David's criminal history. Detective Maria Santos from the Portland Police Department had been investigating a cold case involving suspicious deaths in the area, and David's name had emerged as a person of interest in connection with financial crimes that predated his relationship with Elena. Detective Santos explained that David's pattern of targeting and exploiting vulnerable women extended back further than anyone had previously realized. Police had identified at least 3 additional women who had died under questionable circumstances after becoming romantically involved with David, all of whom had left him substantial inheritances. The evidence was largely circumstantial, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore, and David's conviction in Marcus's case had provided investigators with new avenues to explore. "Your case broke this open for us," Detective Santos told Marcus during their meeting at the police station. "The evidence your mother gathered and the documentation your attorney assembled gave us the framework we needed to connect David to these other incidents. We may never be able to prosecute him for the earlier deaths, but we can ensure that he never has the opportunity to victimize anyone else." The revelation that David was potentially a serial predator who had killed multiple women for financial gain was both horrifying and validating. Marcus felt a mixture of grief for the women who had not been as fortunate as Elena in recognizing the danger, and pride in his mother's courage in fighting back against someone who was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. David's current legal situation had become increasingly precarious as investigators uncovered evidence of additional financial crimes. The money laundering charges had been expanded to include tax evasion and fraud related to his previous marriages, and federal authorities were building a case that could result in decades in prison.
Marcus found himself in the unusual position of being contacted by reporters and documentary filmmakers who were interested in telling the story of Elena's posthumous victory over her predatory husband. The case had attracted national attention as an example of how careful planning and legal preparation could protect families from financial exploitation, and Marcus's story had become a symbol of hope for other victims of similar crimes. Initially reluctant to speak publicly about his family's ordeal, Marcus eventually realized that sharing his story could help other people recognize the warning signs of financial predators and understand the importance of protective planning. He agreed to participate in a documentary about elder abuse, with the condition that any profits from his participation would be donated to organizations that supported victims of financial exploitation. The documentary filming process was emotionally challenging but ultimately therapeutic for Marcus. Discussing his mother's strength and wisdom with the film crew helped him process the complexity of her final months and appreciate the extraordinary lengths she had gone to protect him. The interviews also connected him with other families who had faced similar challenges, creating a network of relationships that would influence his future career choices. As Marcus's first semester of graduate school approached, he received another letter from Elena's collection. This one marked, "To be opened when beginning advanced studies." The letter contained advice about choosing mentors, maintaining perspective during demanding academic work, and remembering the ultimate purpose behind his education. Elena had researched the professors and programs at the University of Oregon, providing Marcus with insights about opportunities and connections that could enhance his learning experience. "Remember that knowledge without compassion is merely information," Elena had written. "Use your education to develop both your mind and your heart. The law can be a tool for justice, but only if it is wielded by people who understand the human cost of injustice." Marcus's graduate program proved to be both challenging and rewarding, combining rigorous academic work with practical experience in legal clinics and business incubators. His unique background as a victim of financial crime gave him credibility with professors and fellow students who were working on related issues, and his financial resources allowed him to take unpaid internships with organizations that aligned with his values, rather than focusing solely on earning potential. During his second semester, Marcus established the Elena Chen Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The foundation provided grants for legal representation, funded educational programs about financial protection, and supported research into prevention strategies. Marcus served as the foundation's president while continuing his studies, learning to balance philanthropic leadership with academic responsibilities. The foundation's first major initiative was a legal clinic that provided free services to victims of financial exploitation who could not afford private attorneys. Working with Patricia and other experienced lawyers, the clinic handled dozens of cases involving everything from romance scams to caregiver abuse. Marcus volunteered at the clinic throughout his studies, gaining practical experience while helping people who reminded him of his own family's struggle. One of the clinic's early successes involved a case remarkably similar to Marcus's own experience. An elderly man named Robert Kim had married a woman who convinced him to transfer his assets to her name, then disappeared with his life savings after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The clinic's attorneys were able to track down the woman and recover most of Robert's money, using investigative techniques and legal strategies that had been refined through Marcus's case. As Marcus progressed through his graduate program, he began developing a business plan for a company that would specialize in protective financial planning for vulnerable adults. The company would combine legal services, financial planning, and investigative capabilities to help families protect themselves from predatory schemes before they became victims. Elena's trust structure would serve as a model for sophisticated planning that could preserve assets while maintaining family relationships. The business concept attracted interest from investors and advisors who recognized the growing need for protective services as the population aged and financial crimes became more sophisticated. Marcus's personal story and his developing expertise in both law and business made him a compelling advocate for preventative approaches to elder protection. During his final year of studies, Marcus received devastating news about David's fate. The investigation into his previous marriages had uncovered evidence that led to murder charges in connection with the death of his second wife, Margaret Brennan. Forensic experts had re-examined Margaret's remains and found evidence of poisoning that had been missed during the original investigation. Combined with financial evidence showing that David had researched poison methods online before Margaret's death, prosecutors felt confident about pursuing a murder conviction. David's trial for Margaret's murder began 2 years after Marcus's civil case had concluded. Marcus attended some of the proceedings, watching as the man who had nearly destroyed his life faced accountability for crimes that were far more serious than financial exploitation. The evidence presented during the murder trial revealed that David had been planning Margaret's death for months, researching methods and timing while maintaining the facade of a devoted husband.
The jury convicted David of second-degree murder after deliberating for less than 4 hours. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to victimize vulnerable women. Marcus felt a sense of closure watching David led away in handcuffs, knowing that his mother's courage in documenting David's behavior had contributed to justice for multiple victims. Marcus graduated summa cum laude from his dual degree program, earning recognition for both his academic achievements and his contributions to the university's legal clinic. His graduation speech focused on the theme of transforming personal tragedy into societal contribution, sharing lessons from his family's experience without exploiting the pain for dramatic effect. Elena's final letter was marked "to be opened at graduation," and it contained her hopes for Marcus's future career and her confidence in his ability to make a meaningful difference in the world. The Elena Chen Foundation had grown during Marcus's studies to become a respected voice in elder protection advocacy. The foundation's legal clinic had helped hundreds of families recover stolen assets and hold predators accountable for their crimes. Marcus's business venture, Sentinel Financial Protection, had launched with backing from investors who shared his vision of preventative rather than reactive approaches to financial abuse. Sentinel's services included comprehensive background checks for romantic partners of vulnerable adults, sophisticated trust structures that protected assets while maintaining family relationships, and education programs that helped families recognize and respond to warning signs of financial exploitation. The company's unique combination of legal, financial, and investigative expertise made it a leader in a growing field of protective services. Marcus's personal life had stabilized around routines that honored his mother's memory while building his own future. He had purchased a second home near the university that served as both a residence and a foundation headquarters, creating a space where he could balance business responsibilities with personal relationships. The friends and colleagues who had supported him through his legal battle remained important parts of his life, providing the kind of chosen family that Elena would have wanted him to cultivate. 5 years after Elena's death, Marcus stood in the cemetery where she was buried, carrying flowers and a copy of his first published article about financial elder abuse prevention. The article had been featured in a national law journal and had already been cited by other researchers working on similar issues. Marcus felt his mother's presence in the quiet cemetery, sensing her pride in what he had accomplished and her approval of the path he had chosen. "I kept my promise, Mom," he said quietly, placing the flowers on Elena's grave. "I used what you gave me to help other people. I became the protector you wanted me to be." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and Marcus imagined he could hear Elena's voice in the sound, expressing the love and pride that death had not diminished. He had transformed her final gift from a source of personal salvation into a foundation for protecting others, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond their own family story. Walking back to his car, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from desperation in a tiny studio apartment to leadership in a growing movement for elder protection.
The path had been difficult and often painful, but it had led him to a life of purpose that honored both his mother's sacrifice and his own potential for making a positive difference in the world. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Marcus's corner office on the 15th floor of the downtown Portland building that housed Sentinel Financial Protection. 3 years had passed since he had established the company, and what had begun as a small consultancy had grown into a nationally recognized firm with offices in 6 major cities. The view from his desk encompassed the entire metropolitan area, a daily reminder of how far he had traveled from the desperate young man who had once slept in his car in a diner parking lot. Marcus was reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant, Jennifer Walsh, knocked on his door with an expression that suggested urgency. Jennifer had been with the company since its early days, a former paralegal who had been drawn to Sentinel's mission after watching her own grandmother fall victim to a romance scam that had cost the family their ancestral farm. Her personal investment in the company's work made her an invaluable member of the team, and Marcus had learned to trust her instincts about which cases deserved immediate attention. "We just received a call that I think you need to handle personally," Jennifer said, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "It's from a woman named Catherine Morrison in Seattle. Her situation sounds remarkably similar to what you experienced with your stepfather, but with some complications that make it even more urgent." Marcus set aside his reports and gave Jennifer his full attention. Over the years, he had handled hundreds of cases involving financial exploitation, but certain situations still resonated with the trauma he had experienced in his own family. Cases involving step-parents who manipulated dying spouses were particularly triggering, requiring him to balance his professional objectivity with the emotional intensity that such situations inevitably provoke. "Tell me about Ms. Morrison's circumstances," Marcus said, already reaching for a legal pad to take notes. Jennifer consulted the detailed notes she had taken during the phone call. Catherine is 34, a nurse practitioner in Seattle. Her father died of cancer 18 months ago, and her stepmother, who had been married to him for only 2 years, inherited everything. Catherine discovered last week that her stepmother has been liquidating assets systematically and appears to be planning to relocate to another country. The basic outline was indeed familiar, but Marcus sensed that Jennifer's concern indicated additional complexities that would make this case particularly challenging. He gestured for her to continue, already mentally cataloging the legal and investigative resources that might be needed to help Catherine protect what remained of her father's estate. The complicating factor is that Catherine's stepmother is a foreign national who entered the marriage with substantial debts and legal problems in her home country, Jennifer continued. Our preliminary research suggests that she may have targeted Catherine's father specifically because his assets could solve her financial problems and provide her with a pathway to permanent residency. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he recognized the calculated nature of the exploitation Jennifer was describing. The case bore disturbing similarities to David's predatory behavior, but with international elements that would make investigation and recovery significantly more complex. If Catherine's stepmother succeeded in moving assets overseas, the family's chances of recovery would be virtually eliminated. "Has Catherine contacted law enforcement or an attorney?" Marcus asked, already anticipating the likely answers based on similar cases he had handled. "She's tried both, but the local police told her it was a civil matter, and the attorneys she's consulted say that the stepmother's actions are technically legal since she inherited everything through a valid will. Catherine is calling us because she heard about our work through the Elena Foundation's website." Marcus made a decision that he knew would require significant resources and personal involvement. "Schedule a video conference with Catherine for this afternoon. I want to hear her story directly and assess what evidence might be available. If this case is what it appears to be, we're going to need to move quickly before more assets disappear." The afternoon video call with Catherine Morrison revealed a story that was both heartbreakingly familiar and uniquely complex. Catherine appeared on Marcus's computer screen from her apartment in Seattle, her exhaustion evident despite her professional composure. She was clearly someone who was accustomed to helping others through difficult situations, but now found herself facing a crisis that her medical training had not prepared her to handle. Catherine's father, James Morrison, had been a successful civil engineer who had built a substantial estate through decades of careful saving and wise investments. After Catherine's mother died of breast cancer when Catherine was in college, James had remained single for nearly 15 years, focusing on his work and his relationship with his daughter. He had been approaching retirement when he met Natasha Volkov, a woman 20 years younger who claimed to be a refugee from Eastern Europe seeking asylum in the United States. Dad was lonely, and Natasha seemed to understand his grief about losing Mom. She had the story about fleeing political persecution, about needing protection and stability. Dad felt like he could be her hero, her protector. It appealed to his sense of responsibility. The courtship had been intense and brief, with Natasha expressing urgency about their relationship due to her precarious immigration status. She claimed that marriage to an American citizen would provide her with the security she needed to build a new life, and James had been swept up in the romance of rescuing someone who needed his help. They married after knowing each other for only 6 months, with Natasha moving into James's family home immediately after the wedding. Catherine's concerns about the relationship had begun almost immediately, but her attempts to discuss them with her father had created tension between them for the first time in their lives. Natasha had skillfully positioned herself as the injured party whenever Catherine raised questions, claiming that Catherine resented her for taking her mother's place and couldn't accept her father's happiness. "Natasha was very clever about isolating Dad from me," Catherine continued, her voice tight with emotion. "She never directly told him not to see me, but there was always some crisis or emergency that prevented him from spending time with me. She was constantly sick or stressed about her immigration case or having problems with former associates from her home country."
During the 2 years of James and Natasha's marriage, Catherine had watched her father's health and finances deteriorate steadily. James had spent enormous amounts of money on what Natasha claimed were legal fees for her immigration case, medical treatments for mysterious ailments that seemed to appear and disappear without explanation, and security measures to protect them from people she claimed were pursuing her from her home country. When James was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, Natasha had immediately taken over all aspects of his care and financial management. She had convinced him to add her name to all of his accounts and to update his will to leave everything to her, arguing that this was necessary to protect their assets from the people she claimed were trying to harm her. James had been too sick and too trusting to question her explanations or seek independent advice.
When I called, she would answer his phone and say he wasn't feeling well enough to talk. I barely got to spend any time with him during his final months. James had died at home under circumstances that Catherine found suspicious, but the attending physician had certified the death as consistent with his cancer diagnosis. Natasha had arranged for a quick cremation and a small memorial service that excluded many of James's longtime friends and colleagues. Catherine had been shocked to discover that she had been excluded from her father's will entirely, with Natasha inheriting not just his financial assets, but also the family home and all of its contents, including items that had belonged to Catherine's mother. Marcus listened to Catherine's story with growing anger and determination. The pattern of isolation, manipulation, and financial exploitation was identical to what David had done to Elena. But Natasha's foreign background and immigration issues added layers of complexity that made the case particularly challenging. The international elements would require specialized expertise and resources that few victims could afford to pursue. "Catherine, I want to help you, but I need to be honest about the challenges we're facing," Marcus said after she had finished explaining her situation. "Cases involving foreign nationals who may be planning to flee the country require immediate action and substantial resources. Are you prepared for what this investigation might involve?" Catherine's response revealed the depth of her commitment to pursuing justice for her father. "Mr. Chen, I've been researching your background since I found your foundation's website. I know what you went through with your stepfather, and I know that you understand what it feels like to watch someone destroy your parents' legacy. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to expose what Natasha did to my father." Marcus made the decision to take Catherine's case personally, assigning his most experienced investigators and attorneys to begin immediate research into Natasha's background and current activities. The international aspects of the investigation would require coordination with authorities in multiple countries, but Marcus's success with previous cases had established relationships that could be leveraged to support Catherine's situation. The initial investigation revealed that Natasha Volkov's background was far more complex and troubling than even Catherine had suspected. Rather than being a political refugee, Natasha appeared to be part of an organized network that targeted wealthy, lonely American men for marriage fraud and financial exploitation. She had used multiple identities and had been involved in similar schemes in at least 3 other states before meeting James Morrison. Marcus's team discovered that Natasha's immigration case had been largely fabricated, with the supposed legal fees actually being payments to associates who helped her identify and research potential targets. The medical expenses had been for cosmetic procedures and luxury treatments rather than legitimate healthcare needs. Most disturbing of all, the security measures she had convinced James to pay for had been designed not to protect them, but to monitor his communications and prevent him from seeking outside advice about their relationship. The investigation also revealed that Natasha had been systematically liquidating James's assets throughout their marriage, converting stocks and bonds into cash and precious metals that could be easily transported or hidden. She had established bank accounts in multiple countries and had been preparing for what appeared to be a permanent departure from the United States as soon as James's death provided her with full control over his remaining assets. Working with federal authorities who had been investigating the broader network of marriage fraud, Marcus's team was able to obtain surveillance warrants that revealed Natasha's current activities and travel plans. The evidence showed that she was planning to leave the country within weeks, taking with her the liquid assets she had accumulated from James's estate, as well as proceeds from similar schemes involving other victims. The legal strategy that Marcus and his team developed required coordination between civil and criminal proceedings, with Catherine's asset recovery case being pursued simultaneously with federal prosecution of Natasha for immigration fraud, marriage fraud, and elder abuse. The complexity of the case required resources that far exceeded what most victims could afford to pursue. But Marcus was determined to prevent Natasha from succeeding where David had been stopped. Catherine traveled to Portland to work directly with Marcus's team during the critical phase of the investigation. Staying in a hotel near Sentinel's offices, she spent her days providing information about her father's finances and helping investigators understand the timeline of Natasha's manipulation. The process was emotionally exhausting for Catherine, requiring her to relive the painful months of her father's illness while maintaining the professional composure necessary to assist with complex legal proceedings. The breakthrough in Catherine's case came when federal agents executed search warrants on Natasha's residence and storage facilities, uncovering evidence that connected her to a broader criminal organization specializing in elder exploitation. The search revealed detailed files on multiple victims, including psychological profiles and financial assessments that had been used to plan targeted schemes. James Morrison's file was among the most comprehensive, showing that Natasha had been researching him for months before their first meeting. The evidence recovered during the searches provided the foundation for both criminal charges against Natasha and civil recovery actions to return stolen assets to victims and their families. Catherine's case became part of a larger federal prosecution that ultimately resulted in the dismantling of an international network responsible for defrauding elderly Americans out of millions of dollars. Natasha was arrested at the airport as she attempted to board a flight to Eastern Europe, carrying cash and jewelry that had been purchased with proceeds from James's estate. Her arrest prevented the permanent loss of assets that could be recovered for Catherine and other victims, but the legal process of actually recovering and returning those assets would take additional months of complex litigation. The federal trial that followed provided Catherine the opportunity to confront Natasha directly and to hear evidence about the calculated nature of her father's victimization. Testifying before the federal jury, Catherine described the impact that Natasha's manipulation had on her relationship with her father and the devastating sense of loss she had experienced when denied the opportunity to properly care for him during his final illness. Natasha didn't just steal my father's money, she stole his dignity, his autonomy, and his ability to make his own choices about how to spend his final months. She stole my chance to be with him when he needed me most, and she stole his opportunity to leave a legacy that honored the values he had lived by throughout his life. Natasha's conviction on multiple federal charges resulted in a sentence of 15 years in federal prison, along with orders for restitution that would return the majority of James's assets to Catherine. The international cooperation that had been developed during the investigation also led to the recovery of assets that Natasha had hidden in offshore accounts, providing Catherine with more complete restitution than had initially seemed possible. The resolution of Catherine's case marked a significant milestone for Sentinel Financial Protection, demonstrating the company's ability to handle complex international cases and coordinate with federal law enforcement agencies. The success also provided Marcus with valuable experience and relationships that would enhance Sentinel's capacity to help other victims facing similar challenges. Catherine's gratitude for Marcus's assistance extended beyond the financial recovery to appreciation for the validation and support she had received during the most difficult period of her life. Like Marcus, she had struggled with feelings of guilt and self-doubt about her inability to protect her father from exploitation, and the successful prosecution of Natasha had provided her with the closure she needed to begin rebuilding her life. "You gave me back my father's dignity,"
Catherine told Marcus during their final meeting after the case was resolved. The money matters, but what matters more is knowing that the truth about what happened to him has been established and that Natasha can't do this to anyone else. The success of Catherine's case attracted national media attention and brought Sentinel Financial Protection to the attention of federal agencies that were seeking private sector partners for elder abuse prevention initiatives. Marcus was invited to testify before congressional committees about the growing threat of international marriage fraud targeting elderly Americans, and his recommendations led to legislative changes that enhanced protections for vulnerable adults. The Elena Chen Foundation also benefited from the increased visibility, receiving substantial donations from individuals and organizations that wanted to support its mission of protecting elderly Americans from financial exploitation. The foundation used the additional resources to expand its legal clinic, fund research into prevention strategies, and develop educational programs that could help families recognize and respond to warning signs of predatory behavior. Marcus's personal life had evolved alongside his professional success, with relationships and routines that provided stability and joy while honoring his commitment to his mother's memory. He had begun dating Sarah Kim, a social worker who specialized in elder care and who understood both the demands of his work and the emotional complexity of his background.
Sarah's own commitment to protecting vulnerable adults created a shared foundation for their relationship that went beyond personal attraction to encompass common values and life purpose. The relationship with Sarah had developed gradually over 2 years, beginning with professional collaboration on cases involving elderly clients who needed both legal and social service support. Marcus appreciated Sarah's practical approach to helping people while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, and Sarah respected Marcus's ability to balance business success with genuine commitment to justice for victims of exploitation. Their engagement had been announced quietly, with plans for a wedding that would honor both of their families while reflecting their shared commitment to helping others. Elena's final letter to Marcus, marked "To be opened when you find love," had included her hopes for his future happiness and her confidence that he would choose a partner who would support his mission while challenging him to grow as a person. The wedding ceremony was held in the garden behind Marcus's childhood home, with Patricia Hendricks officiating as a licensed officiant and longtime family friend. The guest list included colleagues from Sentinel Financial Protection, volunteers from the Elena Chen Foundation, and clients whose lives had been transformed through Marcus's work. Catherine Morrison served as one of Sarah's bridesmaids, representing the extended family of people whose lives had been touched by Marcus's mission. Elena's presence was honored throughout the ceremony through photographs, flowers from her garden, and readings from her letters to Marcus. The couple's vows included commitments to supporting each other's work, protecting vulnerable people, and to raising their future children with the values of compassion and justice that had guided both of their careers. The honeymoon was spent working with international organizations that were developing programs to combat elder abuse in countries where such protections were less developed. Marcus and Sarah traveled to several European countries, sharing their expertise with local advocates and learning about different approaches to protecting elderly citizens from financial exploitation. The trip provided them with global perspective on their work while creating shared experiences that would strengthen their partnership. Returning from their honeymoon, Marcus and Sarah established routines that balanced their demanding careers with their personal relationship and their commitment to the Elena Chen Foundation. They purchased a larger home that had professional responsibilities, including space for foundation events and meetings with clients who needed private consultation. The foundation's work continued to expand, with new programs designed to address emerging threats to elderly Americans. The rise of online romance scams, cryptocurrency fraud, and sophisticated identity theft had created new challenges for families trying to protect vulnerable relatives, and the foundation responded by developing educational resources and support services specifically designed to address these evolving threats. Marcus's expertise was increasingly sought by government agencies, academic institutions, and international organizations that were working to combat elder abuse. He served on advisory committees for federal agencies, lectured at universities about financial exploitation prevention, and consulted with foreign governments that were developing their own protective programs. The 10th anniversary of Elena's death was marked by the dedication of a new facility that would house both Sentinel Financial Protection and the Elena Chen Foundation. The building, purchased and renovated with proceeds from Marcus's business success and foundation donations, included offices for attorneys and investigators, meeting spaces for support groups and educational programs, and a research library focused on elder abuse prevention. The dedication ceremony was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been affected by Marcus's work, including former clients, professional colleagues, and government officials who had collaborated with Sentinel and the Foundation. Catherine Morrison spoke at the ceremony about the impact that Marcus's assistance had on her ability to recover from her father's victimization and rebuild her life. Marcus Chen showed me that victimization doesn't have to define us, Catherine told the audience. He proved that it's possible to transform tragedy into purpose, to use our own suffering to prevent others from experiencing similar pain. The work that continues in this building honors not just Elena Chen's memory, but the memory of all the elderly Americans who have been victimized by predators who mistake vulnerability for weakness. Marcus's speech at the dedication focused on the lessons he had learned from his mother's example and the responsibility that came with the resources and opportunities she had provided him. He acknowledged the pain and anger that had motivated his initial pursuit of justice, but emphasized how those emotions had evolved into a sustainable commitment to protecting others. My mother taught me that love can transcend death when it's channeled into action that helps others. Every case we handle, every predator we stop, every family we help heal is a continuation of the fight that she began when she decided to document David's behavior and preserve resources for my future. This building represents her legacy, but more importantly, it represents our commitment to ensuring that other families don't have to face these challenges alone. The years that followed brought continued growth for both Sentinel Financial Protection and the Elena Chen Foundation, with new offices opening in additional cities and expanded programs reaching thousands of elderly Americans and their families. Marcus's reputation as an expert in financial exploitation prevention led to speaking engagements around the world and consultation opportunities with international organizations working on similar issues. Sarah's career had also flourished, with her social work expertise becoming increasingly valuable as elder abuse cases became more complex and required interdisciplinary approaches. She had established her own consultancy that worked with Sentinel and other organizations to develop comprehensive support services for victims of financial exploitation, combining legal remedies with counseling and practical assistance. Their first child, Elena Sarah Chen, was born 3 years after their wedding, carrying forward Elena's name and legacy into a new generation. Marcus felt Elena's presence powerfully during his daughter's birth, sensing Elena's joy and pride in the continuation of their family line and the security that Marcus had been able to provide for his own child's future. The experience of becoming a father deepened Marcus's understanding of Elena's motivations and sacrifices, providing him with new appreciation for the lengths that parents will go to protect their children's futures. The trust structure that Elena had created for Marcus became the model for the financial planning that he and Sarah implemented for their own daughter, ensuring that their resources would be protected and used wisely regardless of what challenges the future might bring. Watching Elena Sarah grow and develop, Marcus often reflected on the path that had brought him from desperation to fulfillment, from victimization to empowerment. The little girl who bore his mother's name represented hope and continuity, evidence that love and sacrifice could indeed transcend tragedy to create something beautiful and lasting. The legacy that Elena Chen had begun with her secret trust and documented evidence of David's manipulation had grown into a movement that protected thousands of vulnerable adults and their families. Through Marcus's work, her final act of love had multiplied exponentially, creating ripple effects that would continue long after everyone involved in the original case had passed on.
standing in his office, overlooking the city where he had once been homeless and desperate, Marcus understood that his mother's greatest gift had not been the money or the house or even the evidence that had convicted David. Her greatest gift had been the example of courage and strategic thinking that she had demonstrated during her final months, showing him that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, it was possible to fight back and protect the people you love. The work continued, with new cases arriving daily and new predators being identified and stopped before they could complete their schemes. Each victory represented not just justice for individual families, but progress toward a society that truly protected its most vulnerable members from those who would exploit their trust and steal their dignity along with their assets. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.